Hi, everyone. Welcome to Author Talk. I'm Sarah Donovan, and we are talking to the authors who generously contributed to Just YA Anthology, collection of short poems, short stories, flash fiction, and short essays for readers grades 7 through 12. This is a paperback version, but it's available as open access resource for teachers and students at okstate.edu, so you can get it there. So today we are joined with one of our authors, Kate Sjostrom, and she's going to do a little reading with us today. So welcome, Kate. Will you introduce yourself? Tell us where you are in the world.
Yeah, I am in Oak Park, Illinois, which is the first suburb west of Chicago, right near where I teach university in Chicago.
Wonderful. Can you say a little bit about your writing life?
About my writing life. Oh, so I teach people how to teach writing. And a lot of my writing is by doing the assignments I give my students. I'm trying to practice what we preach and do those. But I'm serving as a writer in residence of the Hemingway Foundation in Oak Park, and for that project, I'm working on a novel. I was trained as a poet, um, kind of took a detour through creative nonfiction, hence the piece that is in this book, to try and teach myself writing prose and ultimately fiction. So.
What does a writer in residence mean?
Oh, well, the cool part is that I think the term is derived from the fact that you work at the location. So, when people do residencies, they'll go stay somewhere for a week, 2 weeks, a month, just to focus on writing. A residency with a foundation like this is different because I'm not going to live somewhere for a short amount of time. I partner with the organization over a longer bit of time. So I'm with them for 2 years. But the residence part is that I have a little writing studio in the home Hemingway was born in, which is now the Hemingway Birthplace Museum. So I have a little room in the attic of this old Victorian house that I just have access to anytime to go write. And so that's the writing part, but I do support their programming. So I arrange readings. We did a spooky themed ghost stories in the Hemingway house in the fall, and I just arranged a poetry reading for this April. And I mentor young writers through our scholarship essay program, help select stories for a journal they do of short stories. And then I'm very excited, a summer creative writing workshop series at the Hemingway House for middle and high schoolers. So if you are in the Chicago area, you should check it out.
Wonderful. So glad to hear all of that.
Mhm.
And did you always see yourself as a writer?
Um, if I'm being honest, yes. Although I never told people. And it's funny, I think even though I have degrees in writing, have published a decent amount in a variety of genres, I still don't often call myself a writer, with which I would not say to my students. I think I so admired writers and so admired literature and reading that I've kept it on too high a pedestal. One, I kick over in my classroom to invite my students to call themselves writers. So I think it's very interesting how hard it is to take up that mantle ourselves, right? But from the time I was very tiny, I wanted to be a writer and identified as such inside. I remember the first poem I wrote. I remember the first story I tried to write. Um, and I chose my college based on writing teachers my sister had had there. Um, and whenever you play that game where you say, if you were going to die tomorrow, what would you regret? It's always, I would regret if I hadn't written a book, right? And I have again published a good amount of things, but I'm now working on kind of the project I think I'd always dreamed of when I was a little girl. So that's kind of fun.
Oh, thanks for
Yeah.
sharing all that. I love hearing um, the work that you're doing as a writer in residence and just like sort of the way that you feel about yourself as a writer. I think it resonates with a lot of us. So thanks for sharing that part. Well, you wrote a couple pieces for Just YA, but you're going to read one today. Which one are we going to read?
We're going to read Ready.
Okay. Do you want to frame it a little bit or do you just want to read it first and then we can talk about it after?
I'll frame it a tiny bit to say, yeah, so I came up as a poet. I wrote poetry. I wrote narrative poetry, so telling stories through poetry. And I wanted to learn to write. And I wrote creative nonfiction essays, which kind of lyric essays, so it's like more in the line of poetry. I really wanted, I read fiction. I like reading fiction. I don't sit around reading poetry and essays. I read a book a week. I love reading fiction. So I wanted to train myself to write fiction, but I didn't yet know. So I designed a series. This is part of a much bigger project. I probably have 150 pages of music, um, music focused essays that are me trying to teach myself to write in scene and write dialogue. Um, because again, I hadn't had to use those tools in the type of writing I'd done for years. And so this was like my gateway to fiction. I needed a project, and I work better with an assignment. I'm used to writing shorter pieces up until now. And so um, I had some things I wanted to explore memoir wise. Um, and um, and decided to take the long view by writing down every memorable piece of music. Music for me is the way I organize memory and organize feelings in my life. And so I wrote down every piece of music that I remembered vividly and had an associated experience with. And it was a way of charting two things. One, my relationship with my dad, who, as we'll see in this short essay, was kind of fraught when I was a teenager. And but music, he and I are very close now, and he and my parents divorced during this time, but music was always the through line for that. Um, and it is for me and my daughter in a very different way, but a similarly strong way. And the three of us enjoy music together. And so, as a way of kind of exploring that history with my dad and a unique history with my daughter, which is simply that I love music more than anything, and played it poorly. And my daughter is a freaking superstar classical musician. And so to try and kind of make sense of all of that, I set out to write, to explore it through my musical memories. And the idea was I didn't know what I was going to write. So each piece I sat down just knowing this piece is haunting me for some reason. This piece of music or this moment I listened to it with somebody is haunting me for some reason. I'm going to write into it to figure out why. And so to me, that's very in line with poetry, right? Like poetry has always been about, I think Mark Doty, one of my favorite poets, described it. He came and worked with my students once. He's wonderful, won the National Book Award. If I'm remembering correctly, but he talks about you see an image, you see something that haunts you, and you write to kind of figure out why it's echoing and having resonance. And I looked up, so I was simultaneously using it to figure out the import of these moments. And then the last thing I'll say is, and I looked it up before we jumped on. Annie Ernaux, the memoirist, wrote about her process. Two sentences that really capture kind of what I was trying to do, which is I'm not trying to remember, it says. I'm trying to be inside, to be there at that very instant without spilling over into the before or after, to be in the pure imminence of a moment, which is why I weirdly wrote in the present tense, to try and make myself enter moments to see why they were sticking with me for so many years. So,
Wonderful. All right. Shall we?
all right. So I'm going to take a sip of tea and read you ready. Okay, ready. His left hand steadying the steering wheel, John reaches with his right to eject, flip, then reinsert the mixtape he's made for me. In the seconds before the music begins, I consult the cassette case to see what's next, a song by Muddy Waters. Piano is quickly joined by drums, then bass, then harmonica, then John, who turns to me, smiling, as he sings along to I'm Ready. I smile back, then we both look ahead into the remarkably uncongested lane before us on the main expressway out of the city. It is just shy of 8 a.m. on a Sunday, on a holiday. It's funny, I think. Last year, and the year before, and the year before that one, I would have been heading home at this time too, but from the Easter sunrise service at our church, not from the Maxwell Street Market. Neither my mom nor my siblings wanted to get up for the 5 a.m. service this year, and my dad's not around to make us. But I still haven't digested the fact that my mom let me leave the house on a holiday, let alone with a boy 2 years older than me, even if it is a pre-breakfast outing to browse the stalls at a street market. Breakfast. That is one reason I'm sorry to miss the sunrise service. After the Mass, an old parishioner, George, always puts on the greatest breakfast. Mounds of fresh fruit ringed with palm fronds, island volcanoes erupting pineapple, melons, strawberries. What always gets me is the coconut. Not the shredded kind for baking, the kind I steal by the handful when there are no other sweets in the house. Chunks of real coconut, some still in their hairy brown husks. My stomach longs for them, for anything really. I should have said yes when John offered to buy tamales at the market, but I hate for a boy to watch me eat. I wonder what we'll have for breakfast at home this morning. I wonder, too, if the morning will have gotten started without me, then remembered that my siblings are on college time, so there's no way. Also, I remember that nothing gets started before the Easter basket hunt, and I know they won't start that without me. I'm 14 and out with a boy, but I'm still the baby. And I have no doubt the basket hunt this year is largely for my sake. Otherwise, my sister Monica wouldn't have snuck away to fill the baskets out of my sight last night. And my mom wouldn't have whispered over the phone last week, I'll buy the candy, but I'm not filling the baskets. I always hated that. Past tense. Something is over. John again takes his right hand from the steering wheel, this time to take one of my hair's waves into it and sing with muddy waters about good-looking girls with hair like mine. Then he returns his hand to the wheel and starts explaining that a lot of people think this is a Buddy Guy song, don't realize that his is a cover. I nod, as I've done frequently this morning. This tape, this outing, is clearly meant to be an education. John couldn't believe I'd never been to Maxwell Street, instructed me that early morning is the best time to go so vendors don't think you're just another Blues Brothers tourist. So much for me to learn. And yet he'd gone on about how he likes me because I'm so well read and know so much about art and music, if not the blues. That's why, he had told me as we surveyed the incense burners at one of the market stalls, he so wishes he wasn't fresh out of a long-term relationship. If he were ready for a relationship, I'd be just what he wanted. Yes, this morning has been an education. John turns up the volume and growls things with muddy waters about how ready he is. I look to my lap where I've cradled the incense burner I'd finally chosen, a black painted skull with a hole in the top of its head for the wooden bottom of an incense stick. I lift it, surprised again by its heft, consolation in the face of what seems, upon closer inspection, to be a bad paint job. John stops singing to ask, "What are you going to name him?" Reading my confusion, he looks to the incense holder in my hands. "Well, you got to give him a name." Like so many things John has said today, this suggestion is somehow charming. And like always, I want what I want what I say to impress, to set me apart from the likes of ex-girlfriends one isn't quite over. John's already decided the black skull is a boy's, and so I scan the boys' names in my mind, trying to push past the names of cousins and classmates, all too conventional. I browse book characters for novel names, and then it just comes to me. Atticus, I say. Perfect, John signals to exit the expressway, nodding in approval. I don't admit I haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird, or even seen the movie. Not that I know, nor that I know nothing about Atticus, except that he is the admired dad in the story. Mostly I've just heard the name and thought it sufficiently unique to impress John, which it has. And I like the sound of it. Atticus, I say in my head, looking at the imperfectly painted black skull in my hand. Having named him, I feel protective of him, hold him a little more gently, draw my thumbs softly across his plaster forehead, as if to wipe clean his memory of a life before me.
Kate, beautiful. Thank you so much. When you're rereading this for us, and I know you spent a lot of time working on it for the publication, what stands out to you revisiting it today?
Well, it's just amazing to me. Well, I think about what happens when you write creative nonfiction, when you write essay, memoir, um, you know, how much of that is exactly right versus close enough. Um, and so I do think something that stands out to me is just that line, the emotional truth versus the actual truth. You know, I know he made that tape. I don't know if that's the song we were listening to in that moment, but I know that that's the song on the tape that captures kind of that feeling. But it is amazing to me how long the life of those experiences are, how they lodge in the growing kind of the growing story of our lives and shape it. Um, and also, to be frank, most of these I actually, though I said I was kind of exploring my relationship with my dad through music and my daughter, um, it amazed me how those things found each other in these pieces. How I didn't, this piece was not, I didn't expect my dad to be in it at all. not at all. I expected it to be about this guy. It was a very, you know, kind of tough learning experience when I was 14 and he was older and made me think he was into me. And, what I don't include is this is, we finally had a date and kissed, and the next day he took my best friend out. So this long experience, but how, of course, that was kind of interweaving with what was happening elsewise in my life, and was just another series of disappointments that kind of was racking up in those early adolescent years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love this as part of the collection, and I'm glad that you chose to share it and submit it for this publication. 'Cause I just think it's one of those parts you know, of high school, of just of our youth that doesn't really make it into the classroom very often. Don't know that I see this kind of story in any of those Pearson textbooks that we are forced to share in our classroom, or the short stories that we read with our students in high school that don't actually happen to have any youth in it, any teenagers are in any of those stories, and I feel like this will resonate in a lot of ways with the teens that read it, and maybe the teachers will share a little story or memory from when they were that age as well. So thanks so much for including it. It's just beautiful and gave me a lot to think about too. I know you're working on this novel.
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to say anything about it, or just kind of hear the kind of projects that you're working on, or sort of like the future work that you kind of have kind of coming out. We like to hear what's happening in your writer life next, as we sort of wrap up our conversation today.
Yeah. Well, the novel, I only say that it's not a YA protagonist. I'm going to more of a middle-aged, what I know now, um, protagonist. So that's all I'll say about that. But what else am I working on? I feel like I'm working on a few interesting things. Oh, I'm working with some folks in the Chicago area writing project. We are got grant money that is supposedly not going away, to work with some K-12 teachers over the next year on reading and writing hopeful climate fiction. And so the idea is to create a small anthology out of that that will be open access, and to create a professional development experience out of that as well, to kind of support teachers in um, having and feeling able to use materials around hopeful climate fiction. So that is on the horizon, and that's exciting. Working on some academic projects related to writing, in that they're about how to give kind of nurturing but productive writing feedback, so that student writers really retain autonomy and ownership in the writing process, and that teachers can retain some energy while working with so many students. So that's related peripherally, but exciting, I think. Um, yeah, the other stuff on the horizon, probably less interesting. So I'll leave it at those.
Those are really exciting projects. I look forward to seeing how come to fruition over the next few months or year. So exciting, wonderful. In closing, any kind of words of wisdom or encouragement that you have for our young writers who read your story and or might be inspired to write their own creative nonfiction piece in present tense?
Oh, someone once told me present tense makes you sound crazy.
Not at all.
Right,
Cool.
not me, but that,
Yeah.
that is the tense of instability, right?
Ah,
Somehow. But I think there is again, this has the hallmarks of fiction, but is not fiction. Um, I suppose I would just say mining a memory, going into it is if you let yourself really explore and lean into the images and let them have echoes elsewhere, I think you'll find that no matter how old you are, each is really rich with meaning, and to your life in the present, and meaning to others' lives, right? So, um, not feeling like you don't have a story to tell, that each of the things that is sticking with you for a reason, and has something in it to find, to connect the dots of your life, and to connect, I think, to others' lives for sure. So,
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you, Kate. And thanks for joining us today. So good to be with you.
Thank you. Thanks for the whole project. It's a great idea. I know my students actually were using this semester to find materials to create units on writing short fiction. So it's already a useful classroom tool for us. So thank you so much.
Love it. Thank you.
Mhm.